What is going on, guys? This is Miasin, so I'm finally back from YCS Dortmund, which means that I can start making up-to-date videos again. And of course, since I was there, I can talk about the YCS, what happened, with the insight that I've got. So first of all, it is of course a European YCS, which means a lot of players from pretty much all over Europe, so 2,400 something players, that's definitely a lot. And being from North America myself, I was really shocked to see how serious the Europeans took their YCSs. I kept hearing that a lot of Europeans play Rogue and stuff, but from what I was seeing, that was just not really the case. Everybody I encountered at least played really serious competitive decks, and they all knew how to play their decks to a certain extent. Yeah, I don't think I played against a single player who had no idea what he was doing. So yeah, big shoutouts to the Europeans for being a huge competition. Anyways, I remember making a top 10 best decks video right before this YCS, and I said that the top 3 best decks would be Unchained, Tearlaments, and Purely. And wow, will you look at that, my prediction ended up being very accurate, as we can see that the top 3 best decks in day 1 were actually the top 3 decks that I predicted to be good. And this is kind of crazy considering the fact that people were very skeptical of my claim that Tearlaments would be one of the best decks, if not the best decks of the current format, because honestly, almost everything was a good matchup for Tearlaments now that Kishtira Rizard was no longer in the picture. And while speaking of the devil, it ended up being the most represented deck in Top Cut with 16% of the field playing Tearlaments. That's pretty huge. But yeah, just like at YCS Cancun, I also played Tearlaments at this YCS, and I do believe that I've made a pretty good meta call. With that being said, I'm not going to pretend like my deck list was even remotely close to perfect because it was very wrong and I kind of regret a lot of things about it. By the time I realized my mistake, it was already too late because I already had to submit my deck list and I couldn't really find the cards that I needed to finish off my list. But to be fair, I'm also going to have to say that the other deck lists that I've seen in Top Cut were all just a little bit lackluster. I feel like almost everybody copied Jesse's deck list with the Destiny Hero package, and even though I think it's a good start, it's not enough. Again, with the help of Hani, we were able to figure out probably the best Tearlaments deck list that you can think of, but again, it was a little too late. Either way though, I believe that this format was very up in the air, and I don't think anybody had like the perfect deck list for this tournament. And because of that, I want to say a lot of people kind of went with the decks that they were most comfortable with instead of, decks that were a little riskier. And look, this is like the third time in the last kind of like year and a half in a way that Rika won a big event in Europe, which definitely speaks volume on how much people love the deck over there. The deck literally does not exist anywhere else in the planet, which I find hilarious. As a matter of fact, I'm friends with a lot of pro players from North America, and they all have the same thing to say about Rika. They all believe the deck is awful and only wins because their opponents are always ignorant and don't know how to read the Rika cards. I mean... Hey look, we are talking about Yu-Gi-Oh players at the end of the day. Nobody can read, and that includes me. The Rika deck has been around for a very long time, but even then, nobody really plays the deck, so nobody really respects it. So yeah, nobody really has a main deck good enough to beat it, nobody has side deck cards just for it, and people don't really know how to counter it with the cards, even when they do draw them. It's kind of like Unchained in a way, because that deck also rejoices over the fact that nobody knows what the hell they should be doing against the deck. The only difference is that Unchained is very new, whereas Rika has been around for a very long time. But when you think about it, the Rika deck has a lot going for it, and even if people knew how to beat it, it would still be a very good deck. The deck is super consistent and has a lot of 1 or 2 card combos, and most of which play around Nibiru because you're either accessing regular lists very early or you have the negate off of the Rika Princess. And the end board is not only cracked in terms of interruptions, but also diversity of your interruptions. You have a lot of threats in your monster zone, including Bangalancer or Teardrop or Hyperiton or Regulus. Then you got back row to apply pressure, such as Rika Sheet or Rika Concon to pretty much act as a layer of darkness. And of course, you have the graveyard effect of Rika Princess, which is completely ignorant. I always say this, but the most troublesome decks that I always find are completely unfair are the ones with a lot of different forms of interruptions. Like Ishizu Tier, for example, had a lot of monster interruptions, and then it searched trap cards like Sulik and Crime, and also had the shufflers in the graveyard. Rika, in a way, is kinda similar. Monsters, spells and traps, and graveyard effects, and potentially hand traps as well. So again, it's not like a single Dark Ruler will help you break the board. And the deck does have access to negation cards, so even if you have like Regeki, Duster, Lightning Storm evenly, it might not be enough. I definitely like decks like this one, but at the same time I can't really bring myself to play Rika because it's too much commitment. The learning curve for the deck is extremely rough, and if you want to do well with it, you have to play it for a very long time. The goal with this kind of deck is to catch your opponent off guard because you know how to play your own deck and your opponent doesn't really know how to beat your deck. You're not really trying to play Rika just because it's good. So my personal opinion is that if Rika ever becomes mainstream and everybody starts playing it, it'll be way less good. But one thing I have to say about Rika is that every single time we see the deck do very well in Europe, it's always by a very good player. Whether we're talking about Marcus Patel or Jessica Robinson or Julius, our most recent YCS champion, I'm always impressed by the technical play that these players exhibit during their matches, and I think they all deserve their win independently of how good their opponents performed against them. So yeah, to sum it all up, I want to say the Rika deck is good not only because their opponents are bad against it, but also because it's good overall and just keeps dodging the ban list. Look, the deck was able to catch up with full power tier elements and full power sprite, and pretty much nothing about the deck changed since then. And I want to say one of the main reasons why this deck only really sees plays in Europe and not really in North America is because the North American pro players, they just all have a prejudice against the deck. They think it's bad going first because it can get hand shopped by a good player and just not really do anything, and going second, they just don't really like the deck at all. But yeah, it is funny to see that even though Europe and North America have the exact same card pool, same ban list, some people still choose to play completely different decks even though we could be playing the exact same decks. Anyways, the rest of the field in Top Cut was very normal, so not much to say here. The usual tier elements, Unchained, Dragon Link, Branded, and Flunderies decks were all there. The only thing that seriously shocked me was the sudden drop in Purely. The deck went from a 10% representation in day 1 to pretty much just not really being there in Top Cut. I find this to be really concerning because I do believe that the deck has a lot of really good assets that should make it a top tier deck. It's one of the very few decks with very little weaknesses because it can kind of just inherently play around everything, but I will have to say it loses very hard to Exceedon Core and Herald of the Abyss. And it's sad to say, but these decks are in pretty much everyone's side decks because everybody respects Purely. So yeah, it's very rough for Purely players, but their deck is extremely targeted right now. Who knows, maybe with next format with Age of Overlord, everything's going to change. And maybe Rika will finally get hit on the ban list because it is the 3rd major event that the deck wins. Absolutely ridiculous. Anyways, that's all I had for this video, so guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.